Morning. Thanks, Allegra, and thanks, Tim, for hosting us. What I'd like to do this morning, as we see on the slide here, is provide some summary remarks of a USGS study of the effects of urban development on stream ecosystems, and then we'll be followed, as Allegra said, by a couple of speakers who will illustrate, given some of the challenges that we're discussing in this study, what are some things that can be done on the ground to address some of these challenges. But before I discuss the project findings, I want to provide a little bit of context for the study by first of all summarizing a couple of features of the urban development landscape, if you will, in the United States, but also what we see as we walk along urban streams. And before I do any of that, I need to go get the clicker. Well, this is not a new story. The first sanitation law aimed at protecting urban waters was enacted over 400 years ago in Jamestown. So since then, of course, urban development has been a key agent for environmental change in the United States. So we have an urban footprint that, particularly over the last 150 years or so, has been expanding continuously. 80% of Americans now live in metropolitan areas. And the advantages and challenges of living in these developed areas, convenience, congestion, employment, pollution, are really all part of the day-to-day realities of those 80% of us that live in urban areas. So places like Atlanta have experienced phenomenal growth, as demonstrated by this evolving urban footprint between the 1970s and 2000. An average of 69,000 people moved into the Atlanta metro area each year in the 1990s. And most of the population growth occurred outside and adjoining the city limits. And it was estimated that almost 50 acres of tree cover were lost to urban development every day in the 1990s. When considering the advantages of urbanization and its impacts on urban streams, we have to carefully weigh the benefits that these streams provide to us. Natural stream ecosystems provide benefits such as recreation, drinking water, and aesthetic pleasure that you might find as you're walking along a stream such as this. So protecting urban streams can provide significant benefits. For example, by restricting development activities in their water supply system watershed, New York City's Department of Environmental Protection avoided building water filtration systems that would have cost the city an estimated $4 to $6 billion. As I said, the urban footprint on the American landscape has definitely left its mark on urban streams, as is evident in this figure, which summarizes a lot of the impacts that we might see as we walk along urban streams. Urban development, of course, affects the physical living space for organisms that live in or near streams, which you can think of as stream habitat. Urban development, of course, alters stream hydrology as impervious surfaces increase the speed and the amount of stormwater that reaches streams. And finally, urban development influences and alters water chemistry. Chemical compounds can be introduced both directly from effluent discharge, but also indirectly from sources such as stormwater that might have pesticides or road salt in it. One final piece of context for this study before I get to our three main findings relates to the study design. We used a uniform approach in all 9 metropolitan areas that are shown on the map up here. And we examined a range of impacts in each city using a set of about 30 watersheds within each study area that together represented a range of urban development conditions from very low to very high. And that way we could assess the impacts of a lot of different levels of urban development, if you will, at the same time, rather than waiting 20 years or 30 years for one basin to become more developed. And no other previous study in the U.S. has combined this consistent study design and sampling approach over such a wide geographic area. So it's probably one of the unique contributions of the study. So this approach allowed us to not only provide information about the impacts of urban development at one location, but also to assess how these impacts varied across the country. And just two quick slides here before I get into the results. When we're talking about low levels of urban development, this would be an example of a relatively low-level footprint within a watershed, as opposed to something like this, of course, that would be a higher level of impact. So let me really quickly review the three key findings and then get into some of the details. One finding is that the degradation of the condition of organisms that live in streams begins right at the earliest stages of urban development. Essentially, there's no safe level of urban development that's going to be protective of the biological communities that are found in streams. The response of biota to urban development varied across the country. So management goals and strategies that might be appropriate in one part of the country may not work elsewhere. Finally, you can't single out one cause of the degraded conditions that we see as we walk along these urban streams. The story, in a sense, of urban streams is complex, with many interacting characters, which really complicates the challenges of managing these streams, as we'll see with our next two speakers. So, how is urban development in a watershed connected with the condition of a stream's aquatic life? Let's look at each of the ways urban development might impact streams: habitat, hydrology, chemical pollutants. As I said earlier, urban development typically increases the amount of impervious surface in a watershed, including streets, parking lots, storm drains, and such. So these impervious surfaces move large amounts of water to nearby streams in a short period of time following a heavy storm or rain. So as shown in the figure on the right, stream flows in urban areas, shown by the red line, rise and fall very quickly compared to the stream flows in less developed or rural areas, and reach a lot higher flows. So the peaks, if you will, are a lot higher than the peaks in the undeveloped basins. So this pattern is referred to as streamflow flashiness. The rapid rise of streamflow and the equally quick return to normal levels can have a large impact, actually, on urban streams, particularly the places where organisms live. So let's turn now to stream habitat, which is one of the ways that you see the impacts of the stream flashiness. So again, habitat refers to the living spaces of the things that live in and near streams: algae, fish, macroinvertebrates. And these flashy stream flow patterns can scour sediment from the stream channel and stream bank and cause these channels to deepen and widen and make it difficult for them to support healthy aquatic life. Generally speaking, urban development increases the number and the concentration of contaminants that are found in urban streams. For example, the concentration of the insecticide chlorpyrifos was strongly related to urban development in Atlanta, Raleigh, and Dallas, and the concentration of chlordane was strongly related to urban development in Raleigh. Now, all three places are places of high termite activity, and these compounds have been used for termite control. Interestingly, chlordane continues to be detected in urban streams, even though its use has not been allowed by EPA since 1988. A new class of insecticides called pyrethroids has replaced compounds like chlordane for uses such as termite control. So one or more pyrethroids were detected in streambed sediment at about half of all stream locations that were sampled. Pyrethroids were the primary contributors to the signal of increased sediment toxicity as urban development increased. So with these physical and chemical findings in mind, let's look more closely at the impacts of urban development on the organisms that live in streams. At low levels of urban development, the condition of stream organisms would be resistant to degradation, and that would be the conventional thinking. Whereas as levels of urban development increase, the condition of the organisms would decline. Again, no big surprise there necessarily. And finally, as this trajectory is going to end in a period of exhaustion, when no further degradation in the biological community can occur because literally conditions have flatlined. Now, in fact, this is the thing that the signal that we thought we would see prior to the study, but in fact that we found that the actual response was pretty different from this hypothetical response. As can be seen in this example from Boston, a stream's biological condition actually starts to decline immediately at low levels of urban development, so that by the time a stream's watershed reaches 20% urban development, the biological condition has already declined by 25%. Plus, the decline in biological condition is steady as urban development increases, and there's no evidence of a level of urban development beyond which the decline stops. So that exhaustion thing that showed up on the other slide doesn't seem to happen in the studies that we did. So this response to urban development on the part of organisms has two implications, we think. First, there's basically no safe level of urban development that protects stream health. Even at the onset of urban development, stream health begins to degrade. Second, because biological conditions continue to degrade as urban development increases, stream restoration efforts are likely to help improve the health of many streams in urban areas, even if their conditions are quite poor. So we'll see examples of that in the talks that Ron and Bill are going to give following this presentation. So our second major finding is that while the decline in biological condition occurred everywhere we studied, the rate of that decline varied around the country. So why does that occur? The functioning of stream ecosystems is affected by factors such as climate, geology, landscape, topography, and dominant land use. And in a sense, these factors create a template for the basic conditions of a stream's hydrology and habitat and organisms, and this template influences the species that make up the biological communities that are found in any one of these 9 areas. And that template, not surprisingly, varies across the country. So in general, the biological communities in each of these regions will possess pretty distinct characteristics. And this is true both before and after urban development. So while urban development always leads to some decline in the biological communities in any of these 9 areas, the characteristics of the decline are really going to vary by region. So let me give you an example of what we feel is the cause of these regional differences, which is the way land is used before urban development occurs. So this figure shows the loss of sensitive species from streams following urbanization in Denver, Dallas, and Milwaukee. So the smallest loss of these aquatic species occurred in these 3 areas, whereas the largest loss occurred in these 6 areas. So of Birmingham, Atlanta, Raleigh, and so forth. So what's going on, we think, is that the loss of sensitive invertebrate species was much greater when development occurred on forested land, because prior to urbanization, streams in these more forested watersheds tended to have a relatively high diversity of macroinvertebrates, including sensitive species. So essentially there were more sensitive species available to lose once urban development began. In Denver, Dallas, and Milwaukee metro areas, the biological communities and streams had already endured some degree of degradation associated with the previous land use activities, agriculture, grazing, and so forth. So relatively sensitive species were mostly absent from these streams even in their pre-urban development conditions. So essentially there were fewer species to be lost following urban development. Finally, across all 9 study areas, no one environmental factor was consistently more important than the others in explaining these effects on stream organisms. So changes in hydrology, habitat, stream chemistry essentially act in concert to affect the biota that are in streams. Not only was no single environmental factor consistently the most important, but Interestingly, the three biological communities that we surveyed, fish, invertebrates, and algae, each had different responses to this trajectory of these stressors of habitat and hydrology and chemistry. What this suggests is that regardless of the organism or the community, multiple stressors contribute to the declining condition of these organisms. And the response is going to look different depending on the particular community. So together, these three different communities, the fish and the algae and the invertebrates, provide complementary information about the effects of urban development. So now I want to turn from these three key findings to talk about how the assessments that we've done as part of this project can inform management decisions. So when I began doing this study 6 years ago, or managing this study, I would have said that the most interesting thing about studying the effects of urban development on stream ecosystems would have been to create models that basically link urban development stuff, these stressors, with some kind of response measured in this case by invertebrate metrics. But as the study continued, I really started wondering about stopping a modeling effort at this tier of white boxes here. Because really, how much do most managers or decision makers care about or even understand Plecoptera versus Ephemeroptera? Well, let me give you a hint. Maybe not very much. So does it really make sense to stop this modeling exercise at endpoints that basically are those white boxes? So in the study, we had an interesting opportunity to try and remedy this so what problem, if you will. Working with scientists and managers from EPA and several New England states, particularly the state of Maine, we reanalyzed data from our New England study to see if we could predict a measure of stream health that would be more useful to managers. So what are some of the key things we learned about trying to address this so what problem? Well, the first thing, and it's a pretty obvious thing actually, is that you need to be clear about the objectives that matter to the decision makers. So in this case, in talking with the people in New England, what mattered was meeting water quality standards and avoiding the TMDL. So we used something called the Biological Condition Framework as our measure of how water quality standards were affected by urban development, which fit very well with the biocriteria approach that they used in the state of Maine. The second lesson is that predictive water quality models can be used to examine the impacts of possible management actions on these water quality objectives that matter to a decision maker. So this simple example shown in this slide assumes a situation where we have a high level of urban development and degraded hydrology, habitat, and stream chemistry. So if we have a situation where meeting the water quality standard requires category 3, 2, or 1, category 3 or better, the model in this case predicts that the likelihood of meeting the water quality standard is only 25%, or the sum of these probabilities. So this model, using a statistical approach called Bayesian network, lets us predict, given conditions here, that in this particular stream, the likelihood of attaining is 25%, which, it's a policy decision in some ways, but that doesn't give you a very good probability of attaining a water quality standard. So the third lesson then, third and final lesson related to the so what situation is that there's a need to report these findings in a way that's comprehensible and easily linked with the manager's objectives. So, for example, let's say a decision maker is facing a situation where urban development in a watershed is high and management actions are being considered that will try to improve the conditions of water quality by reducing flashiness and improving stream chemistry. So what happens if we do those, still having a situation where we have high urban development? In this situation, we use the model to predict that if these best management practices are implemented that can reduce streamflow flashiness, and improve water quality, the likelihood of meeting water quality standards in that same watershed are improved substantially from 25% to 70%. Where again, the 70% is the sum of the probabilities for each of those three categories. So I think that this graphical approach for predicting the condition of urban stream ecosystems can provide decision makers with concrete information about the consequences of management activities that they're considering, expressed in terms of things that, first of all, connect to the things that they care about and which can be grasped intuitively in this graphical interface. So expressing the likelihood of meeting or failing to meet a target with important consequences enables decision makers to assess policy options using a process that's transparent and objective. So in closing the presentation, I want to reiterate the three main findings of the study and also point to some additional sources of information. First, degradation in the condition of organisms that live in stream begins at the earliest stage of development. There's not a safe zone, if you will, for organisms that live in stream. And because the biological condition continues to degrade over the range of urban development conditions, stream restoration activities are likely to help improve the health of many streams in urban areas, even if the biological condition is quite poor. And second, the response of biota, as I noted, varies around the country. And so there's really no reason to expect that implementing the same policies to protect water quality as watersheds develop will have a uniform effect across the country. And third, of course, urban streams are affected by multiple stressors. It's not just one bad guy. It's not just hydrology or just chemistry. So you have to really consider all those things that come into play as what we see as we walk along urban streams happens. And finally, the value of all these science findings were increased by using models to assess the effects of management actions on objectives and priorities that decision makers care about. So I want to wrap up at that point, but note, and I think many of you have gotten one of these booklets that's in the back, that as part of our effort to communicate this stuff to a non-science, non-typical USGS audience, we've tried to develop a couple of products that I think will be useful to reach those audiences, some of which are these relatively long circular type products. We also have some fact sheets, and we have a website with video and audio podcasts. So it's our effort to kind of reach out to people of my son's generation who I guarantee you won't be looking at this circular anytime soon, but may be willing to spend 5 minutes to look at a video, and maybe that then is a point of entry into some of the other material. So thanks very much.